Hey everybody, this is Perch. So this is not strictly about comics, but we have a mail that is about different part of geek culture. I actually hate that term. Do any of you hate that term? The, the it's funny to me when shows like The Big Bang Theory would have the cast hanging out in a comic shop and they'd be talking kind of geek stuff. I remember friends of mine would come up and go, "Ah, man, it's got to make you feel good that comics have hit the mainstream." They're talking about comics and there's comic shops here and of course my other life is often rooted in technology. It's like, and there's science and there's technology and it's like, this is finally you have validation. I'm like, dude, they're making fun of those things. All of those things they're not there to celebrate. They're not there to hold them up. They're not there to legitimize them. They're there to mock them for laughs. It's a sitcom. But it's funny to me how I've had conversations. I've had at times people from the news, the local news, not well, I was going to say not legitimate news, but what does that even mean? People from the local news show up to the shop whenever there's a big event, like Captain America's dying or Superman's dying or something like that. They'll show up to as a public interest story. People are lining up for the death of Superman, and so they'd run like a little local 2-minute blip on the news, and they would interview, and they're like, and they would say the same kind of thing. It's like, this is really great promotion from your store, and it's got to feel good that the subculture of comics has become mainstream. And then they would start their little interview, and it's like, bow, pam, zap, comics are everywhere, and I'm like, okay, what are you even doing right now? It's I don't know. It's funny to me. But geek culture is one of those things where it's like, be proud of being a geek. It's like uh, I, it just still the term is rooted in a lot of stuff, and I like this doesn't bother me. I don't walk around like seething in rage when I see this kind of stuff. But let's not pretend it's something that it's not. It's like if somebody's like, hey, look, this person's part of the special needs culture. Yeah, it's like, that's not, I don't know. That's not a compliment there. I'm just just throwing that out there. Anyway, I understand what I just compared to. Anyway, well, whatever. So here's a viewer mail, and rooted in more parts of this culture. And obviously, you know what it is if you read the thumbnail, unless I completely did some kind of trick, but probably not. I don't know. I shouldn't do tricks with the thumbnails, but the devil on my shoulder is like, always. I see other channels and I see their stuff. And they got like an angry, like somebody with an angry face, like disaster. And then then they are talking about disaster. But I always want to do a video of like I don't know, like Superman. There's a new storyline where Superman's fighting the Toy Man, and the toy man got some toys broken and everything else. It's like disaster. Anyway, whatever. All right, finally enough stalling. The mail. Hey, Perch. So this isn't comics related. I just got done saying all that, but it is comics adjacent. Ah, okay, it's one of those. Just like this channel is what, cuck adjacent, sap adjacent, homo adjacent. I heard that the other day. Hate adjacent. I'm adjacent to a lot of things. This is my, what it is my natural charm and outreach. It causes me to be adjacent to everything. It's amazing. When everyone is adjacent, no one is. Isn't that okay? Anyway, there has been a lot of fervor online about Wizards of the Coast and some of the supposed changes they plan to make to their open gaming license with the next edition of Dungeons and Dragons. There have been a lot of the sky is falling, the end is nigh stuff from creators on YouTube, but I was hoping you might be able to shed some insight on the matter since you excel at cutting through the BS like that. Some of the changes sound bad, some sound good, and some sound downright terrible. The last time Wizards tried something like this, they ended up leading it to the creation of Pathfinder, which outsold them and caused them to end 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons earlier than any previous edition. What they're talking about is Wizards just made some big changes to the structure of their game. People broke apart, formed Pathfinder, and it caused them to end the 4th edition. Anyway, the way some of these companies act, I can't say I'd be surprised if Wizards would mess up again. Just that I'd be disappointed. All right. So I have a bit of I knew somebody and actually a few people who worked at Wizards of the Coast quite a while ago. This is like 25 years ago. That company has a fascinatingly goofy history. It just I and by the way, this isn't me going back. Well, I mean, I am going back in time, but it will help explain a little bit where this is all going. People often describe Wizards of the Coast as going woke or stuff like that. But the truth is, Wizards of the Coast has been rooted there for a crazy amount of time. It is Magic the Gathering and kind of when this company started in a little town called Renton, which my apologies to anyone now listening from that area, but it's not the let's just say it's not the nicest suburb of the Seattle area. Wizards of the Coast got embroiled in a lot of just bizarre scandals early on. The scandals typically included like a lot of drug use, a lot of swapping and kind of sex parties and just other things. It's one of those cases where I'm always fascinated how some companies get away with doing a lot of kind of very bosses sleeping with employees and just couples meeting up and swapping. Like a lot of the Wizards, I think, did this thing, as I recall. I think it was Whistler. I believe it was up in Canada. They did a retreat or an offsite. I may have the location wrong, but they basically went up, did a lot of drugs. Everybody had sex with each other, and it was very that was the rooted culture of a lot of that company. Now, that's not to say everything. I don't want you to have the picture in your mind that like you go to work in the morning and just people are in bondage gear whipping each other. It wasn't like that. I mean, it's still a company and with cubes and a lot of kind of depressing work environments, but it was still that's very much the nature of that company. And people, I see people in the last like 5 years or so talking about how they've turned woke. It's like, nah, I mean that's more than most companies. That is their root. Not that sex parties and just rampant drug use equals woke, but I mean they were always going to be predisposed to that. I remember some like who is it? Dino Rossi and Christine Gregoire. I'm surprised I pulled those names out of my head. The two are going for the governor's race of Washington, and the company was so hard behind Gregoire, who was a Democrat, that there was this quiet scandal of like one employee or contractor who was a Republican got their tires slashed, and employees openly admitted they did it. I mean, again, this is way before the Trump era of politics, or even the McCain, Palin, Obama era, meaning before most of you were born. This was going on, and so in many ways, sometimes I think maybe some of you ask me, hey, why aren't you more fazed by some of this political stuff that goes on? Well, one reason is it's like I've been living with it for a while. There's been this behavior for quite some time. Parts of places when I lived in the Four Corner in the Colorado area, it was the opposite. You'd have very very hard Republican in the late '80s, '90s. So I mean, I've seen the extremes when they take over. It's why I'm most comfortable in an environment where you have a balance. But in general, so that's some grounding. Now, as for these changes we're talking about, here's my take on it. I've read a little bit of what they've done. I admit I've not gone into detail a lot of the other videos. So I'm sure there's details and nuances, and I'm sure somebody has covered it really well with like a breathy 2-hour video talking about kind of this specific stat change in an orc that's going to completely upend all socio-political manners of the game. I'm sure somebody out there has done that. I'll say at a high level, some of pros, cons. Okay, so on the positive side, if you are inclined to make your own kind of lore and world, it feels like the new system and what they're working on it'll be easier for you to do that. They'll give you better tools to do it. They'll give you a little bit more freedom to do it, and it looks like at least they're trying to set up, I don't know, a gaming community and by this yeah, that's a wrong word. You're gonna say, but it's like when software companies set up a developer community where people can come in and they can create tools and they create other methods for you to kind of do your job. So if you're the kind of person who heavily customizes your D&D campaigns and everything else, it sounds like you're going to have a little bit more freedom, a little bit better ways to do that. Sounds like there's going to be a little bit more open-ended stuff. However, it also means to take advantage of that, you have to be really hardcore into setting things up, creating campaigns, all of these pieces. It means it's going to be beneficial, I believe, to the people who really invest the time. That's the positive. The negative is it absolutely, at least from even the limited things I've seen, the Dungeons and Dragons kind of TSR, well, TSR doesn't really exist anymore, but that entire kind of universe of rules and characters and kind of backstory and history is going to it's going to be far more tied into current day topics, politics, and themes: LGBTQ, trans, different racial themes, etc. It's going to be heavily, heavily woven into the lore and what's going on. I think this is a massive detriment. And I think that for one major reason. And no, it's not because, not even, it doesn't even have anything to do with any of, the LGBTQ community or rights or racial or nothing. It's that I believe, and just my own personal belief, I believe that things like Dungeons and Dragons, role-playing games set in an entirely different world, universe, mythology, completely not ours. I believe they should not connect to politics and social themes of our world. I believe the characters, the players, should bring that into the game if they want, but it should feel like a different universe. It shouldn't. To me, it's the same problem I have with comics when they bring in 2021 politics into a comic book that's meant to live on forever. In 2028, those themes are going to read terrible. And by the way, it's not just politics, social issues. It would be, I mean, it'd be like if you started to put in hey, I know it would be great. Like in the 90s, if the addition of Dungeons and Dragons introduced things like skateboards, and it's like, yo, before you go into battle, you get a attack advantage if you yell out "radical, dude." And I mean, like, no, that would age like sour milk. Nobody wants that. And to me, a lot of these themes, I mean, one thing that is true, and in my mind, again, you may disagree, is that the kind of the social world, how we think of ourselves, how we communicate with others, how we how people interact, is going to continue to shift and evolve. So it doesn't. No, I don't think gay people are going to go away. Of course not. But consider that 30 years ago, 20 years ago, one of the big themes is, hey, people who are gay should be allowed to marry. Okay. This was the big thing, and people were kind of, I don't know, will this destroy the construct of marriage? I don't know. If you go 10 years earlier than that, or maybe 20, I don't. In the 80s, you had the AIDS epidemic where people were terrified of gay people, like, oh, a gay guy may have used the toilet, I'm going to get AIDS. I mean, that was what was on people's minds. So in 2023, thankfully, we're past both of those things. They're in the rearview mirror. To a large extent. I know Twitter every now and then comes in with the Republicans are trying to get rid of your gay marriage. That's not going to go away. Stop being ridiculous. That's fear mongering. But I know some people will come in and go, "Well, do you know?" But the thing is, these social constructs, these relationships, these ways we see each other, have evolved, and in many cases, evolved positively. Now I'm not talking about kind of the people yelling on Twitter, the marches. I'm just talking about, two people interacting with each other. One of the people I work with is gay. They just adopted a kid. They had a relatively easy time adopting. I knew another gay couple, 15 years ago, and they had a terrible time adopting it. It was very, very difficult. Now, these two have been in a relationship together for, God, I want to say more than a decade. It's a very stable house. Combined, the two are probably pulling in, I don't know, $450,000, $500,000 as a combined couple. They're well off. Both are religious. They have a stable home. They will be good parents to that kid. You may disagree, but I mean, it'd be hard. You would be hard pressed to look at that and go, "That's a bad environment for that kid." They had an easy time of it. They're happy. They're doing their thing. 25 years ago, that would have been difficult to impossible. On the individual level, a lot of positive things have occurred. When you see Twitter themes reflected in something like Dungeons and Dragons, number one, it's going to age fast. In 2 to 3 years, it's going to feel old, and you're going to be stuck with these characters with attributes and backstories and histories that are rooted in Sean King level, racial philosophy. And I think that's going to be a huge detriment. Basically, you're going to be asking the players to kind of just ignore that stuff. And then second, and this may be my own bias, I don't know what people are thinking of. I haven't played Dungeons and Dragons in forever, legitimately forever. I mean, it's been decades.
I'd play those games to escape. When I would play, even when I'm playing a video game, I don't want to be running around playing God of War and having it remind me of George Floyd. When I tried playing the new Batman, Arkham Knights, the new one, and for the love of God, it kept inserting kind of it was in the background, sure, but the little news blips of like, hey, are we going to support Tim at the gay pride parade? It's like, I'm not against those things. I'm not against the parade, but I am against it when I'm trying to play a video game starring Batman, except Batman's not in it. I'm fighting the Joker right now. I don't want to think about a pride parade. This isn't the place for it. That's just my opinion. Other people, I think they like to have current social themes reflected in their media. I think if you're doing something to escape, it shouldn't be there. And I think if you are inserting that stuff in, A, you're dating your product, and B, you're just dragging people through. You're distracting from the core product you're trying to produce. And I think that the part about Dungeons and Dragons where it's always succeeded is that it's been immersive. You get into it, and it's a full immersive world. You're supposed to forget your current day troubles and role play. That's the idea. So the game pushing kind of current day themes in that, I think, breaks that illusion. I do think that it also hampers the player experience. If you're a player, and I checked on this because I was curious, somebody mentioned it's like, well, you couldn't be gay in Dungeons and Dragons back in the 80s. It's not true. Your character could be as gay as you want. There was no rules in there that said, elves can only have sex with the opposite sex. There's nothing in there. It didn't say anything. So you could be anything. There was body morphing and all kinds of stuff in these games kind of all along. You could be anything. You could be non-binary. Most players of Dungeons & Dragons were very non-binary. I tell you that because it's extremely awkward to be playing a role-playing game with a bunch of friends, and then it's like, all right, well, now two of us are going to have sex, and we're going to describe it in front of the whole group. No, nobody does that. I don't mean real sex. I mean in the game. Like it's cringy and awkward. So I'm noticing that some of the changes are going to now you'll be able to identify as non-binary in Dungeons and Dragons. You always could. What is the point? By pushing it to the forefront, you're actually taking away the creativity of the players, in my opinion. You're taking away people's ability to actually immerse and roleplay and be themselves. Now they're like, well, I got to fill it out as a stat. I'm like, what? Anyway, I don't know. Maybe that's a terrible take. You let me know in the comments below. I'm sure you will. And thanks for writing in, and thanks for listening.